Yo, yo, yo. What's up, people? Hello. Hello again. I'm back with the latest edition of, I don't even know what you call this thing. Some people call it the Justin Murphy live stream. I just call it going on YouTube, but here we are. Today, in just a few minutes, in fact, I'm going to be joined by a software engineer at Urbit. And I think we will kind of go over, once I have him in here, I'll introduce him a little bit more with him here, and I'll go over a little bit more about why I'm really interested in talking with Ted. Is his name Ted Blackman? We're going to be speaking with. But many of you will have heard of Urbit, even if you don't know exactly what it is. In fact, a lot of people don't really know what Urbit is. It's a fairly obscure startup, I guess you could call it. And yeah, what they make is not a kind of user-friendly app or something like that. And it's a little bit obscure. So a lot of people don't know what it is, but they want to know what it is in large part because the kind of founder of the Urbit enterprise is named Curtis Yarvin, who some of you might know of by his pseudonym Mencius Moldbug. So, yeah, many of you will know that Mencius Moldbug is kind of known as a quite influential kind of neo-reactionary blogger. And this is just a person who, wrote a lot of blog posts over the course of a few years. I think this was back in around 2009 was, if I recall correctly, kind of the heyday of the blogger Mencius Moldbug, who happens to also be a very high level computer scientist with some really interesting and novel ideas about how you can basically run what we think of as the internet on a very different kind of networking model, basically. So it's a very from what I understand, and I'm no expert. That's why I wanted to talk with an expert. But from what I understand, it's a pretty foundational kind of alternative to how you even conduct networking relative to the way that we currently do it. And yeah, so that's why it is well known and a little controversial, because Mencius Moldbug is a controversial blogger. And yeah, so a lot of people are really interested in understanding Urbit and what's really going on under the hood, but it's quite obscure. So it's quite mystified to a lot of people, including myself. I've read a fair bit about it in the past week, trying to kind of brush up on it before I talked with Ted, but hopefully he will. Hopefully the goal here is that Ted will give us a really nice way to kind of pin down the basic logic, the basic idea of what Urbit is and how it works. And then we'll talk a little bit about the political implications, because, a lot of people have a lot of strange ideas about, well, we'll just leave it at that. A lot of people have a lot of strange ideas. And so we'll try to sort through, we'll try to sort the wheat from the chaff in this conversation. So I think that's enough of an introduction for now. I see there's already some people throwing some shade already in the chat, like someone saying it's just a glorified personal server. I think I've heard of this critique. I think they addressed this in the FAQ. So, but that's good. That's something I can ask him right away in the chat. I'll be sure to ask him. If you have other questions about Urbit, just feel free to type them in the chat, and I will do my best to get them into the conversation. All right. Let me just send him the link now. Yes, Andy K says that he's tried 3 times to figure out what Urbit is, and no luck. I also have tried a few times. I think actually they've updated their documents. I think because this week when I was trying to look, I found it much more useful than what I saw last time. So that's interesting to know. Hello, Ted. How you doing, man?
Hello. Doing pretty well.
Good, good. I love your sunny California backdrop there.
It's pretty nice.
It is nice. I wish it was like that in England right now,
I
but
can breathe today too.
alas.
That's good.
What's that?
I can breathe today too. That's good. Air
Oh
quality.
yeah, it's been on fire, right?
Yep.
Not fires in where you are, but nearby that you can smell it and everything, right?
No, a couple hours away, but really big fires.
Yeah, that's so crazy. It's almost like humans aren't supposed to be in Silicon Valley. Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, when I was there, like, I just had this like strange feeling. I was there for the first time actually this past year. I had this strange feeling that there was something like satanic about it. Like it's like too beautiful to be true. It's too sunny. It's too nice, and everyone wants to be there. But it's so expensive, and there's all kinds of like really ragingly crazy homeless people, and it just felt like this kind of like a some kind of like terrible biblical conflict was on the horizon. Is like the feeling that I had when I was there.
Well, sounds like maybe somebody could have been more hospitable to you. Yeah.
No, it just felt, I don't know, it just something about it felt very uncanny, and it felt like I don't know, like in a strange way, these fires that are taking place, like it's a total tragedy. I wouldn't I would never want to justify it in some kind of like cosmological narrative. But I don't know, when I was there, I just had like, you see all kinds of crazy things there, like with earthquakes, right? With fires, with, you know, like there are a lot of super volcanoes nearby. You know, it's like very beautiful, attractive place where seemingly everybody wants to be. And yet in weird ways, it seems like quite, I don't know, it's like something about Mother Nature wants to wreak vengeance on us.
San Francisco is a strange place. I've been here since 2011, and I mean, I originally wanted to come out here. I mean, the direct reason was for work. I started a company out here, but but I'd wanted to come out here for a year or two before that, just because the culture is pretty interesting, and yeah, I have felt more at home here than I have in any other city.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Nice.
So there's something about there used to be more of this too before it got so expensive, but you know, for a long time it's been a sort of confluence of a lot of different kinds of people. And I remember, you know, when I first got here, I was hanging out with the guy I started the company with. There was another programmer, and then a painter, and a sort of itinerant musician, and some kind of spiritual guru guy. And you know, we were all hanging out, and I think that kind of hanging out is sort of emblematic of sort of the San Francisco that I came out here to be part of.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. Yeah, definitely a lot of cool people out there. A lot of different people. I appreciated that, even the short time I was there, for sure. Well, Ted, thanks again for agreeing to meet with me. I think, as you know, I'm eager to have you on to learn more about Urbit. And as I'm sure you're aware, you know, Urbit is very interesting to a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are very curious about this name. I mean, even just the name of the company is quite intriguing, I think. Urbit. What's an Urbit? People think to themselves. They want to know what exactly is this Urbit thing they've heard about. And also, I think in particular, because for whatever reason, I think it has a lot of political connotations. And so we should, what I'm thinking, well, actually, we've just kind of gone over this a few minutes ago, you and I privately. I think what we'll do is first, we'll just talk a little bit about what Urbit is and how it works. I think there's just, it is a little confusing, really. And a lot of people think of it or know of it as sort of notoriously confusing. So I think if we could try to just pin down what it is and give people a better sense of what Urbit is, that would be an excellent accomplishment that people would find worthwhile, myself included. And then maybe after that, once we pin that down, if we can pin that down, maybe that will give us a basis for maybe exploring a little bit some of the somewhat strange and controversial political implications that people associate with it, rightly or wrongly. Maybe you can help us kind of sift through some of those things. Does that sound about right?
Sure.
All right, awesome. So, I mean, do you have a kind of initial kind of elevator pitch? I'm sure you have some experience or practice, like trying to explain to people what Urbit is. Do you want to kick us off with how you would describe it?
Sure. Let's see. So, well, Urbit is designed to build a network of personal servers. And so a personal server is like a personal computer, except that you run it in such a way that it's always on. It can always listen for incoming requests. This was actually the original dream of the internet. That was the way the internet was supposed to work, so that you have a computer and other people can send you stuff. But what actually happened with the internet was that it became largely centralized, right? So there are these really big companies, Google, Facebook, etc. And most of the time, if I'm, so for example, right now, this video chat, my computer, my laptop is sending packets to Google, and then Google is sending packets to you.
Right.
So everything's going through this big centralized service, and that's true for most things, even things like chat messaging, which it's actually a little strange to think like, why do you need a centralized server?
Right.
And the real answer is that you don't. But it's very difficult to build a sort of less centralized system that works peer-to-peer, given the way that computers work currently. And so Urbit is a sort of re-envisioning of kind of what is like a sort of abstract model of a computer, and then an implementation of that abstract model in such a way that it should be simple enough to actually realize that initial dream of the internet. So I can run a personal server, I can run an Urbit, and that can talk directly to yours, and it's a end-to-end encrypted peer-to-peer networking. And so we see an internet that kind of layers over the existing one that's just a lot more secure, a lot more like relaxing, and a lot less kind of controlled and moderated by any kind of centralizing influence.
Right. So one thing that someone might ask right away, even just in response to your initial description, which in fact, I think someone in the chat has already asked, is how is it different than just people making their own personal servers, which you can already do without Urbit?
It's basically not. I mean, it is just a personal server, and our existing computers are Turing complete. They can run anything you want. But what's different is that what the Linux kernel achieves in around 15 million lines of code, with another, I think, 20 million lines of code for Google Chrome, Herbet is about 30,000 lines of code. So it's 3 or 4 orders of magnitude smaller. It's also conceptually smaller, and that's the reason that we're able to get such smaller code size. And the reason we can do it so much smaller is that it's designed from the start to support what it actually does. And this is in stark contrast to our current computational system, which was not designed for doing anything like what it does.
Okay.
So we're using these operating systems that are all based on Unix. So for Windows, which is not based on Unix, but OS 10, Linux, these are Unix operating systems.
Right.
And Unix was designed around 1970. So it's going to turn 50 soon. At the time that Unix was devised, computers didn't talk to other computers. Not really. I think there was maybe ARPANET had gotten started, or maybe it was getting started in a few years. But even so, that was sort of a bizarre experiment that there were only a few computers involved with. The idea of a computer was this thing that sat in a room and that many people would connect to. They had this mainframe, and so you'd have lots of people trying to connect to the same mainframe. So the whole idea of the operating systems that we use now, it was actually based on this idea that lots of people are sharing one computer, and that computer doesn't talk to other computers. And this is actually reflected at many levels of the design of Unix, from the permissioning system to the fact that networking just isn't part of the system and has to be bolted on.
Right. Okay.
There are also some technical issues with the way that our internet protocols work, and so because they basically weren't designed to run at the scale that they run at.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So what you can do with Urbit, you can kind of piece together right now with existing technologies, but you're doing it in this kind of very inefficient way, piecing together layers of accumulated technologies that weren't really made to do that. Whereas Urbit is basically trying to kind of redesign the thing from the ground up in a way that's ideal for this kind of radically decentralized networking. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
And yeah, you said that there's a comment about, isn't this just a glorified personal server or something like that? There's a whole graveyard of projects coming before Urbit that are trying to solve the same problem, right? That are trying to build a personal server, and they've all failed. And the reason essentially is that you can run a personal server, but you don't want to. It's a pain.
Right.
You have to be like a professional Linux system administrator in order to do that, and it's a big job, and it's definitely not something that like my grandmother is going to do. It's not something that I'm going to do as a programmer. It's too much work.
Right.
And like why? And so basically, when you try to run a server on the public internet, it's a deeply scary proposition. It's actually pretty tough to make sure that that doesn't get taken over by malicious code.
Okay.
The public internet is actually sort of a scary place to try to run a piece of code. Lots of things are going to try to take you over very quickly. And not just that, but these things require a lot of upkeep. You got to put in a lot of effort to make sure that you don't run out of disk space and things like that. There are a lot of management tasks that you have to do to try to just keep a server running. And those management tasks, a lot of them just come from the sheer complexity of the system that's running. And it's basically just impossible to take a system that's that complex and make it simple to keep running.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think that's a pretty good first cut at the basic idea and the basic motivation and how it departs from currently available technologies. I think now, if I understand correctly, Urbit currently is a quite obscure sort of. It's in an obscure kind of testing mode, development mode, right? Where right now only hackers kind of play with it. But
and we don't tell people to go run it because it does run. It works. It's not vaporware, but it also is not mature and is not user friendly and is not fast. And I think there's another comment. It's like, oh, if you wanted just Amazon Web Services, but quirkier and with dumb names, then Herbet is for you. And yeah, that's about right for the moment. That's a good critique.
Well, I have some notes, and one of the things I want to ask you a little later in the conversation is I do want to ask you about the weird names because I'm intrigued. I want to learn more about how the whole like planet and star system. It's kind of interesting.
Sure.
But let's get there. Let's get there when we get there. I think right. So currently it's really only for hackers, but my understanding is that the endpoint or the desired goal is to have this as a very accessible thing that anyone can fire up quite easily, right?
Yes.
Right. And so what is the kind of ideal dream state for Urbit to finally arrive in? Is it like any person can just buy a computer and load it? Like Urbit is kind of like the operating system. Like you just by default, you open up your computer and you're in this world of Urbit, and it's this totally decentralized networking model all kind of put together for you already. Is that the end game?
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
Very much so.
Interesting. Cool. So I think that makes much more sense. Like I think when people think about it currently as this kind of weird hacker way to strangely piece together things that already exist in other weird hacker ways, people are kind of like, well, what's the point of this? But I think when you understand that the end goal is or correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the end goal is a fundamentally different type of interacting with the internet, a fundamentally different type of computing and networking that in its finally developed state will actually replace what we all currently do.
Yep.
Okay. So that's good that we pinned that down a little bit. Now, could you maybe go a little bit deeper, maybe one notch deeper in helping us understand like with the main technical idea or innovation of Urbit, like how exactly is it going to do this?
Yeah. Let's see if I can. There is actually a core piece of Urbit that makes it possible to do this. It's a little bit. It's very technical. So stop me if I start speaking gibberish. But
okay.
So really the core of Urbit is the way we think about what a computer is. And the way that we think about what a computer is in Urbit is as a function, mathematical function. So that function takes you from the previous state of your computer, which includes all of your programs and all of your files, and the state of like what's on your screen potentially, but everything. So that's one input to this function, and the other input to the function is an event. Something happens. So maybe a user pressed a key, or maybe the computer received a request from someone over the network. So that's the other input. So you have this function that takes in two inputs: the state of your computer in its entirety, and some new event that happened. And then this function runs and takes you, and it outputs another pair, which is the new state of the computer, which is potentially modified from the previous state, and then a list of effects that should be sent out to be performed, such as maybe like writing a character to the screen or sending a network response back out. And so Urbit is an implementation of that function, and that function is called knock, and it's basically like a functional machine code. So it's just all these trees of numbers that the computer understands to be a function, and so you have some tree that always gets evaluated to become some other tree, and so that's every time your computer receives an event, it runs a function from tree to tree, and that determines the behavior of your computer.
And you're saying that's what it currently does, or that's what it uniquely does in Urbit?
That is what Urbit uniquely does. There's actually nothing else that operates this way. Well, I mean, there are some sort of small pieces of other computational systems that run this way.
Okay.
But Urbit is the only thing that runs a whole computer this way.
And so what is valuable about this way of doing it?
Yeah. What's valuable about doing this, there are a few things. But I think the overall biggest benefit of it is that you're just standardizing the computational model. So you're standardizing like what is a computation, how do you run a computation. You're standardizing that in this way that's very clean and very tiny and doesn't ever have to be changed. So knock, which is this function that runs all of Urbit, our version numbers go down in Herbet. We call it Kelvin versioning, so like it goes to absolute 0. And so when the version numbers get to 0 for any particular piece of the system, they're all versioned separately. But knock is currently at version 4. We just went from version 5 to version 4. So we only have 4 more opportunities to change knock ever.
So why is that?
Actually never get to 0.
That's strange. Why is that? Why does it go down towards 0? It's interesting.
Yeah, and it's actually, there's another way of describing Urbit, which is that Urbit is sort of that which is the result of building a system with downward sloping version numbers.
Okay.
But the reason is that we want it to become a standard, right? Okay. And so when you have a standard, breaking the standard is very expensive. And causes a lot of problems. And so the most successful standards actually usually kind of congeal and become frozen. So we're trying to kind of do that process of creating a standard and then also do it in such a way that, hopefully we don't kind of linger forever and no one really knows whether this thing is done or not. And it's like there's a measurement of how done it is.
That's interesting. So 0 will be the final Urbit?
Yeah. Yeah, and so eventually the whole operating system, all the parts, everything in kernel space, user space will continue to turn over, and ideally very fluidly, just by receiving a packet, which is how it works right now. So that part actually works well already. But the components of the system itself, like the sort of infrastructure part of the operating system, that will completely freeze at some point and never change again. It might take another 50 or 100 years for that to happen.
Right. Okay. So that's
Maybe.
really interesting. Were you in the middle of a thought? I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Well, I was saying it might take 50 or 100, maybe 200 years. I mean, for it to finish congealing for all the different parts of the operating system.
Sure.
This is a very long-term project. So yeah, it doesn't work that well right now. But if you imagine all the sort of person hours that can be put into, one 30,000 line piece of code towards making that kind of timeless and kind of like universally applicable way of defining a computer, it starts to look a lot better when you think of it that way.
Right. Okay. So, Ted, one of the implications of Urbit that I think I'm somewhat familiar with, if I understand it correctly, is that in the Urbit model, individuals are kind of much more tightly bound to their computer. Is that right, in terms of identity?
Yes.
So obviously in the current status quo, you can have a million different Twitter accounts, a million different internet accounts of all different kinds, right? But Urbit by design would significantly cut down on this availability of anonymity. Is that right? Could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. So in Herbet, you have an address, which is like an IP address in a number of ways, but different in a few significant ways. So personal servers. So if I run a personal server, and I do have ones called Ravnus Rikfer, which is Ravnus Rikfer is actually the address, and it's just a pronunciation scheme for a particular 32-bit number. So each 8-bit piece of that is one syllable, and this is a permanent identity on the Urbit network. So it's both like a routing address, so that other computers in the Urbit network know how to send packets to me, and it's an identifier, sort of like a handle, and then it's also a cryptographic identity. And so it's sort of the last part that's most interesting. I mean, something that people don't really know usually about the current internet is that an IP address, like an address on the routing table of the current internet, is not associated with any kind of cryptographic information. There's not like a private key that owns that address. That's not how it works. Encryption was sort of added in later, whereas for Urbit, encryption and identity are built in from the very beginning, and so every address is owned by a person, and the way you own the address is by owning the private key that controls that address.
Okay.
And so it's a secret, so if you have the secret, if you know it, then you have cryptographic ownership of this address.
Right.
And you have to pay for it. And this is how we're funding the company as well, is by selling off blocks of addresses.
Is that what the planet sales are?
The star sales, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just clarifying that. Okay. Cool.
Yep. And so, and I'll get into that terminology in a little bit. But,
Great.
But I guess so. You need a few things in order to get some system like this to work, where you actually have a real identity, real in the sense of cryptographically secure identity on the internet. And one of the things you need is you actually need some scarcity, because and you need it to cost some money, because otherwise you can do what's called a Sybil attack. And this actually happens all the time at several different layers of the current internet, where you can say create 1,000 new Twitter accounts for free.
Right.
And so, yeah, maybe each one of those has a private key, but if you can do it for free, then you can effectively become someone else whenever you want. And so there's nothing to prevent you from, say, sending out lots of spam or other kind of abuses of the network.
Right.
Whereas with Urbit, there's a fixed number. They're 2 to the 32, so 4.2 billion possible personal addresses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they're 32 bits, and which means there are only 4 billion of them.
So not so not everyone is allowed on the internet.
Well, that's always the first thought that people have, but it's really each one of these might be like a family account.
Okay, right.
And the reason that we can say that is that a full Urbit address is actually 128 bits. It's just that the personal servers are limited to 32. So like if I have Ravnus Rikfer, for example, my Urbit address, there are another 4 billion addresses underneath that one. So like really that are in my sort of subnet, and those are completely controlled by me. Those can't exit the way that the personal addresses can exit, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay. But basically, I have this whole subnet that I can control that are all sort of aspects of my identity. You know, like everything's a what is it in Hinduism? Everything's an aspect of Brahma, okay. Right? Within my address, there are all these different.
Oh, okay. So one address can sponsor a lot of users.
That's right. Yeah. So, and the idea is that that's for all the connected devices. So if I have, a laptop, a phone, some other desktop, those will all be what are called moons underneath my planet. 32-bit address is a planet that has up to 4 billion moons underneath it. And it might seem like a lot, but we're sort of expecting just, you never know if somebody is going to have a bunch of sort of Internet of Things light bulbs or whatnot that you're going to want to control, okay. Your own personal botnet. So if you have a family that owns one of these addresses, then each person could have a moon underneath that. Totally feasible.
And how many moons are there allowed total?
Well, 4 billion per person. So total is 2 to the 64, which is 4 billion times 4 billion. So
yeah, right. So moons are not, going to be there's not going to be like an upward ceiling on moons that we're going to encounter in the human species anytime soon.
That's right.
Right.
We'd have to go expand to some other planets, physical planets.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So scarcity is imposed. It's it's costlier to have an identity on the internet, basically.
Yeah.
And the idea is that would significantly decrease all kinds of bad behaviors. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's not just the fact that there's a limited number. It's also that it's you actually want this to be a permanent identity for yourself. Right. You want to sort of make a name for yourself and be known as a reasonable person. So it's the kind of thing that you're going to want to hold on to and maintain a reputation for, as opposed to wanting to flip it.
Right. So you would imagine kind of reputation systems being built on this on the public web. So right. So going onto websites, there would be kind of cryptographically enshrined reputation markers on various websites, likely.
Yeah. And we actually envision that happening at several different levels. It's not built into the system. This is something that will have to happen organically by the network. That will have to be built organically by various people in the network. But there are a few different levels that you might imagine that happening at. And the lowest level is just at the packet routing level, right? So let's say, you're a pretty shady looking fellow, and let's say you buy a planet and you immediately just send out a spam, some sort of phishing scheme or something, to 10,000 planets, and you're just barraging everybody with tons of network packets. The star, which is an infrastructure node, there are 65,000 infrastructure nodes called stars, and every planet at any given time is being routed to by one of those stars. The star notices that you're being an abusive spammer. It will stop routing packets to you, and it might also it might also notify other stars and say, okay, this address is a spammer. So if you get packets from them, just throw away the packets immediately so that it doesn't clog up the network.
Now, is that a rule that's kind of programmed and enforced by Urbit centrally?
No. So this is a rule that every node would have to agree to individually.
Okay.
Right. So it's not a rule really. It's like it's just a sort of consent, or not even a consensus. It's just up to each star's discretion whether or not they're going to continue to route packets to somebody. And basically, this is kind of a binary thing. It's like you're pretty much either a spammer or you're not. So it's not something where there's going to be like complex social judgment. It's something that's going to happen probably completely automated, just based on some sort of rate limiting check. Like, oh, this address is sending millions of packets all the time.
But you're saying this would emerge kind of organically by the different individuals on the network setting certain thresholds for what's acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll probably emerge from the network sort of building a piece of code that actually does this this sort of filtering. And it's probably a good time to actually talk about the network hierarchy and how that works, routing hierarchy. You want to go into that?
Yeah, please.
All right. So I said there are these 32-bit addresses, and those are for personal servers, right? So there are 4.2 billion total available personal servers, and I've said it's a peer-to-peer network. So, which it is. So it means that once I know where you are, if I'm a personal server, you're a personal server, I can send a message directly to you. That message is signed by me cryptographically and encrypted by me in such a way that only you can decode the message. But in order for this to work, I actually have to know where you are, right? I have to know where to send this packet. And so in order to know where you are, there are a couple of levels of routing hierarchy. And so those levels are stars. There's 65,000 stars. That number is from 2 to the 16, because each star is a 16-bit address. And then there are 8-bit addresses called galaxies. So there are 256 of those, 2 to the 8. So the galaxies are the root nodes, which means that at any given time, everyone always knows where all the galaxies are. And by where they are, I mean what IP address they have. Remember, Urbit layers over the existing internet. So you don't need specialized, routing hardware. You don't have to buy a special modem to run Urbit. It runs on top of what we've got right now. And the way it does that is by layering on top of IP addresses. And so now the reason we didn't use IP addresses is they have all the problems of the current internet, and they also cycle very quickly. So this is part of why we need this routing hierarchy, is because where you are, that the answer to that question actually changes rapidly. So in Urbit, what you're making permanent is who you are. Where you are can continue to change. So in any case, I want to send a message to you. We're both personal servers, planets, 32-bit addresses, but I don't know what IP address you have. So I can ask my star, which is in charge of routing packets for me. And if my star doesn't know where you are, then it'll ask my galaxy, my star's galaxy. And that galaxy will then ask your galaxy, which will then ask your star, and your star knows where you are if you're on the network. Okay. And so then your star will send back the answer to the galaxy, send back the answer to my galaxy, back down, so up and down the hierarchy back to me. And then I have your IP address. And then once I have your IP address, I send messages directly to you. They do not go through the hierarchy. Once I know where you are, it's direct.
Okay.
But in order to know, where to aim that packet, we have to have this hierarchy. So we say that it's a semi-decentralized network. The other term for this is a federated network. These are both pretty standard. Federated network is a kind of standard networking term. So then there's this question of all right, well, who are the stars and galaxies, and how does that work? And those are the addresses that we sell for money primarily. And they're all designed to be run by, each one is supposed to be run by a different individual.
The galaxies or the stars, or both?
Galaxies and stars, yeah.
And is it like they're more expensive the higher up they go?
Yeah, because they also, when we sell them, we also sell. So if we sell a 16-bit address, there are 65,000 planets underneath that star, and so if we sell a star, we're selling sort of the ability to run that star, and then also the ability to sell the addresses that are underneath that star, that the star would be responsible for routing for.
Okay.
So we're selling off a subnet, a whole block of addresses.
And what happens if one of the people who owns a star or owns a galaxy is just like a terrible person who either is lazy or does nothing or can't maintain it, or is like a bad actor like Kim Jong-un and is going to like do kinds of malicious activity to its property?
Yeah.
Well, how does that work?
So it works through exit. And so we call it escape, actually, where a planet, so a personal address, personal server, can always escape to a different star. So if I'm a planet and you're a star, and you just start doing really weird, mean things to me, just like maybe you're not routing my packets properly, or maybe maybe I catch you lying about something, or maybe you just have bad service quality.
Yeah.
Or maybe I just don't like you personally. For any reason at all, I can go talk to some other star and say, hey, I'd like to move. Would you like to route my packets instead? And there's generally a payment agreement there. We don't have the payment agreements in place because the scale isn't big enough. But the idea is you'll pay some small amount of money, sort of like an ISP, or like paying Comcast or something. So you pay some small amount of money per month for the star to continue to route the packets. And then, so basically I'll take my business elsewhere. So I can say, you know what, I'm no longer under you. You're no longer routing packets for me. I'm going to go to this other star, where they won't treat me like dirt.
Okay.
And so the idea is that you need enough, variety there. This is why we have so many stars, right? Not just the galaxies. We have 65,000 stars. You got to imagine that out of those 65,000 different individuals, there's going to be one of them who isn't a total dirtbag.
Yeah.
Right. And so really there will be several. And actually we expect that. And so this is where we're sort of, the idea is that when you're running a star, right, you're responsible for routing to part of the network. You should also be able to make money off of that responsibility if you actually shoulder the responsibility properly. If you don't shoulder the responsibility properly, all of your customers will leave, go to other stars.
Okay.
And this is true for galaxies as well. So the galaxies are the root nodes. There are 256 of those. And there are 256 stars under each galaxy. And the stars can also leave the galaxies.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
You could, if you buy a galaxy and don't run it well, then you've just made a very bad investment.
Okay. No, that's really useful. I understand much better now the intergalactic metaphor. So it's like individuals are nested in this hierarchical structure that is somewhat reminiscent of our relationship to our galaxy.
Yeah,
I get that. Right. Okay. So one can already kind of sense a little bit. Listeners right now can probably sense a little bit of overlap. I think between some of these ideas and what we might call Moldbugian politics, in the sense that, what you were just saying about trying to design a system in which the failure modes for a particular authority can be solved by the governed units being able to move laterally to another kind of governing authority. That's the kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know if that works in meat space, right? I actually just moved to this place, and man, it was a pain. It took me a few weeks, and I'm still kind of tying up the loose ends with the bank and my old landlord and whatnot.
Right. Yeah, moving is the worst.
And I was just moving from one place in San Francisco to another.
Right.
Plus moving to some different country.
Yeah, it's a huge pain in the ass, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that works for real world governments. Urbit is not a real world government. It's a digital system, and And it turns out that moving a server from one router to another logically costs nothing. You just send a few packets around, and write something to disk, and you're done.
Right.
So there's much less reason to there's much less friction for doing that in Urbit. I mean, the other thing I guess I feel like I should mention that there's a pretty common misconception about Urbit that each sort of star will be its own social network, or its own community, and that's actually really not the case. So we expect there to be sort of a network of social networks on Urbit, and those are not going to be sort of delineated along the network routing hierarchy lines at all. Just the way that I might have Verizon and you might have Comcast, but that doesn't affect like which Facebook groups we're in.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. So I guess I feel like that's another common misconception that I'd like to kind of clear up. It's like this is a really low level hierarchy thing. Like the hierarchy is really just for low level packet networking, and it doesn't really affect the social dynamics directly.
Right. When you say low level, that might confuse people. When you say low level, you mean very abstract in kind of the engineering, like that.
In this case, I mean low level. I mean low level in the sense that machines care about it, but not people.
Yeah. Right. Something else also that I was thinking about when we were talking about the anonymity question. I believe it's kind of a misconception that on Urbit, it's like everyone is going to have to be locked. Everyone is going to have their kind of identity locked to their computer, and that it would be that it's necessarily going to be a major cramp on anonymity. My understanding is that that's actually a bit of a misnomer, right? Because you can actually have anonymous identities still, but they're just going to be they're going to be tightly locked to the computer. Is that right?
Yeah, there are kind of two answers to this. The first one isn't as good, but I'll say that one first. So the first not as good answer is that I said earlier that the Urbit addresses are 128 bits, but I've actually only talked about 64 bits worth of that space.
Okay.
Right? So we talked about planets, which are 32 bits, and then moons, which are 64, which are under the planets. Those are the connected devices. So that leaves 64 bits of extra space in the network, or really 128 bits minus the 64. And so those are called those are called comets, those 128-bit addresses. And so those are kind of outside of the routing hierarchy, and they're anonymous. So they do require somebody to route for them, but you don't have to buy them. They're 128 bits. 2 to the 128 is such a huge number that's effectively infinite. So there's no cost for those addresses. And so if you want to use an ephemeral or anonymous address, you can use a comet. It's not a very good answer for a number of reasons. And the biggest reason is probably that a lot of things will probably just filter out comets because you don't want to have to deal with the Sybil Attack issue. And so you just don't want to have to deal with spam that could come from anywhere.
Right.
It's unclear whether we're going to keep comets, actually. But the better answer is really that you can be pseudonymous on the network. So you have an Urbit identity, which is permanent, but that Urbit identity is not necessarily tied to your real world identity.
Right.
And there's nothing preventing you from having multiple. So you might have, if you're in some, I don't know, if you're in some oppressive country, let's say, and you have one, you might have one sort of publicly known Urbit address that's tied to your real identity, and then a pseudonymous one as well.
Right.
Different address. It's possible.
So ironically, it's almost like Urbit would actually be better for people doing serious stuff under pseudonymous conditions. Like, I think a lot of people who get their panties in a bunch about this are like anonymous, I don't know, like Twitter figures and bloggers or whatever. People who have like these pseudonymous identities that they've cultivated and they've kind of invested in over time. They try to do serious writing or whatever, serious work under these pseudonyms. Herbet would actually be better for them because they would actually be able to integrate their other accounts with their pseudonym in a more robust way. Actually, probably, is that fair?
That's completely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's I mean, we don't really design Urbit to be a cypherpunk system, but you can use it that way.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it would work quite well for that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's I think a misconception. It's not actually cracking down on responsible anonymity, but it would be cracking down on anonymity that's used for bad behaviors.
Yeah, well, it's really like, I mean, again, it's like bad network behaviors, right? Bad like sort of
Right.
at a very like, again, at a sort of low level. Like, are you abusing the network like at the machine level, right? Are you just like clogging up the tubes with packets, that sort of thing?
Right.
Yeah.
Ted, could you speak a little to what are kind of the big wins from a kind of consumer or user experience? Like what could people look forward to when Urbit is developed at a certain stage as like really attractive features?
Sure. I think that the biggest kind of category of those is going to come from the fact that we're removing a conflict of interest from the user interface. So through Urbit, let's say we just want to do some social networking, right? Like I want to send you some pictures of my boring vacation or whatever. When I want to do that, I'll send you those pictures. There's some user interface where I can send you those pictures. And then I'll send them to you and you'll look at them, or you probably won't, but you could. And that interface that you're using when you look at those pictures, with Urbit, that interface is going to be something that there isn't like a corporation behind it.
Right. I read about this. Okay.
Some open source piece of software that somebody wrote, and it wasn't too hard to write, and so it didn't take that much time. Somebody just kind of did it as a labor of love, and that interface will work directly for you.
Right. That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, there's because nobody has to run some server, and running the servers takes a lot of work, and a lot of work means it takes a lot of money. You got to pay system administrators and engineers, and Facebook, for example, had to go and spend, it must be billions of dollars at this point on infrastructure, like technological development of their own infrastructure, which is a little crazy. I mean, like they're really just kind of sending pictures around.
Right.
Instead of everyone kind of shouldering the responsibility of like holding on to their own data, sending the packets to their friends, it's Facebook's centralized servers responsibility to do it for everyone, over 1 billion people. So that's a big job, trying to do all that and keep it all consistent, make sure you don't lose any data, and make sure it's fast, right? And that's a big, difficult job, and it's actually just a job that doesn't have to be done. And
also, we have to currently log into all these different websites.
Yeah, and that's another issue. But I guess like the overall kind of value proposition from a sort of far away, more abstract level is that you'll have a user interface that works directly for you, that doesn't have sort of mixed loyalties, where it's sort of nominally providing something to you for free, but its actual purpose is a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders of Facebook Incorporated, right?
Right.
And the way that they maintain that fiduciary responsibility is by serving you ads and gathering data from you, so that other people can show you ads. And when a user interface is doing that, you get all these little frictions, like it's popping up ads at you, it's rearranging your timeline. It'll do things like, and overall, it'll try to get you to spend as much time and attention on that piece of software as it can, right? I think more so than the like data privacy issues, I think it's the real like user experience problem there is just that these things are deliberately addictive. It's like I don't know, it'd be like if you go to a restaurant and they're just like hiding cocaine in the food or something.
Yeah.
And they actually really are heavily engineered to be addictive. Actually, I used to the company that started when I first came out to San Francisco was we built user interface components for the Microsoft Kinect, so you could like control a computer by waving your hand around. It turns out that's kind of a lame way to control a computer, but but I went to a video gaming conference while I was doing that, and I watched a talk about how to, and it was even in the title of the talk. It was like how to make a game addictive.
Yeah,
and talks about how you can do things like you have it be free to play, but then you have in-game content that you have to pay for, and like how can you kind of structure it. One of the things they mentioned was that you want to use random rewards, because if you just do the straight Pavlovian, do something good, get a pellet,
right,
that actually isn't as addictive as if it happens randomly, right? So you actually want your game to work more like a slot machine, where you keep pulling the lever, and then every once in a while, randomly, you get something, because that's sort of a better hack into our amygdala or whatever.
Right. And so the idea is that with Urbit, we would be able to share text, video, images, all the things we currently share on different multiple platforms controlled by other people. On Urbit, we would be able to basically have any variety of personal interfaces designed to our liking on our own computers. And we could all do that separately to our likings.
Yeah. Right. And there's no one in between you and that, right? There's no one who kind of needs to squeeze money out of you in order to make that work. Or there's you still have, somebody has to route the packets, and you actually just pay them directly. You pay the star. So yeah, paying you because you're routing my packets.
Right. How much do planets and stars go for right now?
I don't think I can say that.
Oh, that's not a public fact?
No, I don't think so. It's also we're not selling any at the moment.
Oh, so are there only like periodic moments where they go up for sale?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is there another one coming up? I think someone asked this earlier. Or you're not allowed to say that?
I'm not allowed to say. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to pry. I didn't know. But...
No, it's cool. No,
cool. So it's just every so often they go up for a surprise sale.
Yeah. I mean, I think that long term we expect that a planet, we don't know exactly what the monetary value will be, but we expect that a planet, which is personal address, will be pretty cheap. We expect it to be basically just slightly more money than you would expect to make by like one big round of spam.
Okay. Right.
It has to be more than that, but it doesn't really have to be much more than that. And I mean, like anything digital, right? The marginal cost is effectively zero.
Right. Okay. So I have a question. The way that identity is tracked on Urbit or through Urbit, you referred to cryptography earlier in our talk. Is the activity of users being basically tracked in a blockchain kind of way? Like, are we talking about kind of irreversible public records of all activity on the network or something like that?
No. So because it's a peer-to-peer network, the only thing that can be tracked would be, like Ted wanted to talk to Justin, so he asked for Justin's IP address. But then any packets that I send to you can only be decrypted by you.
Right.
No one else can even read them. So there's not even technical capability for anyone else to track what's going on.
But one of the selling points we talked about is this kind of reputation management function. How would that be carried out or enforced if there's not kind of robust tracking of past activity?
So you got to think about it again. There are multiple layers to the system, right? So there's just the packet networking layer, and then there's the layer above that, which is not even really formally defined in the system. It's just the kind of social networking layer, right? I mean, and it's the difference between connecting to Comcast and sending a message to your friends on Facebook.
Okay.
And they're pretty separate layers, right? So Comcast is going to kick you off if you're just filling the tubes with packets, right? You're like physically sending way too many bits, right? Then they'll do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook doesn't really have that kind of, well, Facebook actually have that kind of filter because in addition, because they don't have good protection against Sybil attacks either. So they have to sort of build in their own protection against Sybil attacks at a higher level. But with Urbit, you wouldn't have to do that because the lower levels will actually handle the Sybil attacks for the most part. And then but within any Facebook group, or any kind of social network, there's going to be some kind of moderation, right? Some kind of, every kind of social group has their own social norms, and they'll want to make it so that the people in their group are respecting their social norms. So there are, you can create a social network in Urbit, just essentially like a chat circle, chat room type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still working on exactly what that looks like. And it's also the kind of thing that it's a relatively thin layer to build that on top of just the Urbit networking in general. Like, you don't have to build that much to get like a chat room out of the basic Urbit networking.
Okay.
But yeah, each one of those will want to do its own kind of moderation, and those vary widely, right? Like,
okay, so that's where the expectation of kind of more robust reputation management systems that would be built up separately and in different ways on different use cases. That wouldn't be something being done in the background by Urbit or something like that.
Yeah, and then you could imagine that, and you could imagine that there are sort of that various kind of organic reputation management systems arise, and they might be sort of per application or per service, right? I mean, maybe you have a good reputation on the equivalent of like a jokes subreddit, and a bad reputation on the equivalent of Uber,
Okay, interesting. Right. So
those things maybe they shouldn't be related,
So the reputation issue really just comes in due to the fact of the way the person's identity is linked to the computer, and the computer's identity is
right.
The computer's identity is just a little bit more kind of hard coded than it is currently with IP addresses.
Yeah, and it's more permanent.
More permanent. Okay.
Yeah, it's so hard coded. Yeah, yeah, and your identity and your reputation are more permanent. So it's a little bit more like real life, where those things actually are pretty permanent.
What if you buy a star and then the computer crashes or something like that? Like, that's not a problem, is it? If like you lose a particular computer and you have to restart on a new computer.
So yeah, I mean, you asked about, that's a good question. You asked about like whether everything's sort of tracked through a blockchain
or something like that. Yeah.
User activity, like anything that happens within Urbit, is not tracked on anything, and there's no blockchain inside of Urbit. Urbit's actually older than Bitcoin, but we will soon use Ethereum to maintain the ledger of who owns what. So the ownership records of who owns a star, who owns a galaxy, who owns a personal address, and who in the sense of which Ethereum address. So still not directly connected to anyone's real name necessarily. But that record of who owns what is maintained on Ethereum. And that's also where or will be very soon. So, and that's also where the public keys of your Urbit, the public keys that people know. So like within Urbit networking, the public key of your Urbit that you use to send messages to other Urbits, or really that you use to receive messages from other Urbits, that public key is listed on Ethereum. So it's known.
Right. Are you using Ethereum as one possible example, or are you saying that Urbit has this kind of relationship with Ethereum?
Well, that is the relationship that Urbit has with Ethereum primarily.
So Urbit is being developed kind of with and on Ethereum in some sense?
It integrates with Ethereum, and
Okay.
it uses Ethereum for maintaining what's called the PKI, the public key infrastructure, or it will very soon. And it'll also use it to enforce the Urbit constitution.
Oh,
So
interesting.
that, yeah, because the network is going to govern itself, and so the galaxies can vote on a constitution, and the way they do that is actually using Ethereum to do that.
Okay,
so we're
fascinating.
going to launch that relatively soon. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Contracts are open source. You can view them on GitHub. The Urbit constitution and ledger. Those contracts are all you can look at them.
That's interesting. So basically, the kinds of commitments that Urbit is making to about its plans and its enterprise, that's kind of that's more credible in a sense because it's being enforced kind of on the blockchain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's not just like it will no longer be just, some obscure company in San Francisco holding on to the record of who bought what in some sort of bespoke database. It's like, it'll be a matter of public record.
Okay, fascinating.
Yeah, and there'll be there's some limitations on which addresses are transferable when and which addresses can be launched when and that sort of thing, but that are enforced by that Ethereum contract. But it'll be possible to transfer, to sell off addresses under certain circumstances through Ethereum.
What do you think will be the next kind of milestone of Urbit's, accessibility? Like what do you see coming down the pike? If you could give any kind of information, or even just your own hunches or your personal preferences or hopes or wishes or whatever, like what's something coming down the pike with maybe like a rough time frame that people might look forward to as a milestone for Urbit being more interesting and immediately attractive to normal people?
Yeah, sometime in the next year or so, you should see a revamp of the user interface. So you can connect to Urbit through a web browser, and the way that works right now is a little clunky and not very fully featured. But you should expect, within a year or so, you should expect a new version of that's actually much more usable, and should be like relatively smooth. I think there'll be an iPhone app that goes along with that.
Interesting.
But, so that you should sort of be able to, at least chat with your friends over Urbit more easily.
That's interesting.
And, like share files and that kind of stuff.
And what about even right now, like for someone who is, not an especially expert programmer or hacker or whatever, but, someone who's like basically familiar with doing stuff on the command line and, knows how to run scripts and stuff here and there. Is there cool stuff that you can do with Urbit kind of right now at that kind of level of expertise that people don't really know about? Or is it just not really ready for even that type of user?
I mean, we really don't encourage people to use it at the moment.
Okay.
But you can chat, which can be fun. And then if you're interested in learning more about the system technically or learning programming, it's actually a pretty interesting way to learn programming. I've known a few people who kind of learned Urbit programming first, and it's a very different feel from other kinds of programming because just because of the way the system is very different technically.
Okay.
Most other things, and so it's a very different feel. And it's I've been working at Herbet for almost a year and a half now. I've been a professional programmer for about 8 years, and it's actually pretty nice to work in. It's and I think I'm pretty confident that 10 or 20 years from now it'll be really nice to work in.
Interesting. Now, but I saw in the docs like you can do, for instance, you can host a blog or something like that. There's some like tutorials for that sort of thing. And is that it didn't look that difficult? Is that something?
No, it's not. I mean, it's not the easiest way to do it, but you can do it. And Yeah, I mean, the other disclaimer I should mention is that we haven't had a security audit done. And so while the design of Urbit is, the sort of architecture is designed to be amenable to being made secure, we have not executed on that yet. And so I wouldn't put anything valuable in there.
Right.
And we have a big disclaimer about that on the website too.
Right.
But you can use it and play around with it for sure. And it's fun if you're into that sort of thing. But it's definitely like a nerd project at the moment.
Okay. Right. So there's this nice slogan on the website, or a phrase, if you will, that if Bitcoin is, the crypto version of money and Ethereum is the crypto version of law, then Urbit is like land. It's something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing.
Yep. Digital land, digital real estate.
Yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting, to put it in that sort of sequence. Is there anything else that's interesting about how would you characterize the relationship? I guess you did a little bit before, but the relationship between
Urbit and blockchain
and crypto generally, I guess.
Yeah, they synergize really well, actually, and they're interestingly kind of technically similar. So they're all deterministic distributed systems, and basically the difference between the most comparable one to Urbit is Ethereum, probably, because you can run computations in Ethereum. But the difference is that Ethereum is one global computer, right? Like the way it works is that there's sort of logically speaking, there's one computer total in Ethereum. And then everybody just runs that same computer, and it uses the sort of Bitcoin style consensus mechanism to make sure that everybody's agreeing on what code to run inside of that computer.
Right.
Urbit is sort of the opposite. Urbit is everybody's got their own computer. And then the consensus mechanism, well, there isn't one. Like Urbit is not a blockchain. It doesn't guarantee that any two computers have their state synchronized. Because you don't need it. Sort of not what it's for. You could actually build a blockchain on top of Urbit, like using Urbit's networking protocol, which I would really love to see somebody do. But the but in general, there are a lot of similarities. I mean, these things are also sort of somewhat decentralized. And one of the initial applications that we see Urbit being really good for is actually for managing crypto accounts.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a sort of tiny, very secure computer that also communicates over decentralized networks. And actually, we're building a connector to the Ethereum blockchain into the system at the moment, and that's for integrating for our integration with Ethereum, right? Because we are using it as a ledger and as for maintaining our constitution. And so the way you'll actually, if you're a Galaxy, like the way you'll vote on the Ethereum constitution is by running a command from your Urbit, and your Urbit will talk to the Ethereum blockchain. So we're building in a connector at the moment, and you could also just do that to communicate with arbitrary other contracts on Ethereum. And then because Urbit is a very or will be a very solid computer. Like it's a little buggy right now, but the design is so simple and sort of rigorous that once it's a bit more mature, it'll be a very solid way to run code. It's deterministic, repeatable, and transactional. You can replicate it easily in the sense of replicating the data and ensuring consistency and secure. And so you have this very nice kind of digital home from which you can command your other sort of digital enterprises, right? If you've got some Bitcoin or some Ethereum, like talking to those blockchains from Urbit makes a ton of sense.
Why is that better than talking to Bitcoin and Ethereum through current technologies? Like, what makes it better? Exactly.
Well, one big piece of that is that it's just like what client are you running? Like, how are you actually talking to this? And so, or how are you actually talking to the blockchain?
Right.
Most people who have say own Bitcoin, they do it through some sort of centralized service.
Right.
They
Or
go,
like Ethereum, like you have to use MetaMask on your Chrome browser, and you have to kind of do all these weird things. Is that kind of what you're talking about, or no?
that too. But I think there's sort of two pieces of it. Yeah, like one is that there's this tendency for these things that can be run decentralized to like will actually go through the centralized service anyway, because
Right.
it's hard to run decentralized stuff on the current internet.
Right.
And
So like Coinbase or something.
yeah, right. So people go through Coinbase, and it's like, why does Coinbase exist? Isn't that
Yeah.
kind of contrary to the idea of how Bitcoin's supposed to work? And like, it is contrary to the way that Bitcoin's supposed to work. But there are a lot of things that you can't do if you're not running your own server.
Gotcha. Right. Okay.
Right? So with Herbet, you're running your own server. You can listen. Right. You can listen for events off the blockchain. Right. So like with and that's probably more important with Ethereum. But just in general, it's like, yeah, you want to like get a notification if somebody sends you money, something like that, right? Like you have to kind of go through some sort of centralized service that's going to actually run a server for you in order to do that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I should have seen that to start, but that clarifies.
Yeah, there are a bunch of little things. There's like a ton of little details, little frictions with the way that we use computers these days that stem from the fact that our computers are overgrown modems, right? Our computers are clients that connect in to somebody else who has to actually run sort of effectively like a real computer, like a computer that can actually receive requests from other computers, from other people. Like your laptop can't receive requests. All it can do is send requests out, really. Like it's not always on. And people don't always know where to find it.
Right.
It's just not how it works. And so you have to have some server that's out in the sort of public internet to listen for things. And there's this whole slew of problems that come from not being able to do that yourself.
Right.
And
Okay.
So all the things you can do yourself with Urbit.
That makes total sense. So this is actually a nice segue into maybe reflecting on some of the political implications, because, it sort of sounds like if I were to, let's say I wanted to make a new society or something like that, right? And I wanted to design a constitution and run that through Ethereum, put that on the Ethereum blockchain. And I had a bunch of, willing participants who wanted to join my new society. And we developed the rules, agreed to them, and formulated those as smart contracts on Ethereum or something like that. Following the metaphor that I invoked before, that's on the Urbit website, Urbit would kind of provide the land or the space for, or could Urbit but provide the land for kind of developing that kind of society? Like, are we talking about with Urbit? Are we talking about the kind of infrastructural possibilities for fundamentally new types of private spaces and communities? Like, is that the type of thing that we are to think of when we think of land and a territory? Or are we talking about the possibility of new types of political territories?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really know. I think the short answer is like you could probably do that. It's I think it's easy to kind of conflate. On the other side, though, I think it's easy to conflate like real world governance and digital governance. Like Urbit does have a constitution for doing digital governance, but it's not attempting to do meat space governance, right? We're not trying to like supplant the U.S. government in any form at all, right? Okay. Like we're very much sort of like give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and this is even reflected in our like corporate strategy, I think, to some extent. Where like a lot of crypto companies are like, they're out there like doing these like shell accounts in the Cayman Islands and all this kind of, or Switzerland or whatever. And no, we don't do that. We're like, no, we're a U.S. company. We're doing everything kind of, we'll just like buy the book as best we can. And like the, it's like we're not trying to be a real world government. at all. So, I mean, I guess there's some sort of I don't know, if you were like a charter city or something and you wanted to like use Urbit to build your government. I mean, it would probably help. You know, there are probably ways of using it for that, or will be once Urbit's more mature. But really, that's just because it's sort of a generic computation system and generic networking system. And so just the same way that, like, I think doesn't Estonia have like a all digital government?
I've heard a bit about that. I don't know too much about it though.
Yeah, I think they do. I think that's like, yeah, like you pay your taxes like digitally and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Which sounds pretty nice, frankly. But the so you know, if they wanted to, use Urbit internally, just for sort of technical purposes, to solve some of their technical problems of doing that, yeah, you could. And I think, but you know, we're not really. That's not our first use case. You know, we're not doing user stories around governments using this.
Right.
But I guess I think that one thing that's sort of similar to what you're saying that is true, though, is that we do expect Urbit to be more of a kind of polycentric world where because it won't have these sort of big centralized giant mega corporations running the socializing, right? I mean, that's such a weird thing that we kind of take for granted, that, you know, whenever I just like even this, you know, Google Hangouts here, you know, like I just want to chat with you. But actually, you know, it's going through this huge corporation.
Yeah.
In order to do that. And, you know, they're not really censoring the video, but on Facebook, you know, they'll censor stuff, right? And it's just weird that you know, they're kind of looking in, and not just censoring it, but they're also reading it to try to figure out what to advertise to you. You know, Google they'll read they'll analyze your emails to figure out what to sell to you. Right. And that's a kind of sort of privacy leakage is very strange, and it's something where, like, I think you do end up with a more that has a sort of centralizing influence on culture in general.
Right.
And so because Urbit it doesn't have that centralizing influence, we do expect that cultures will diverge more from each other. Right. They'll just have, you know, if you want to have an insular community, or even just a non-insular community, but just some new community on Urbit that's really yours, where, you know, maybe it's closed and no one else gets to see it. No, maybe no, but, right? Like, you can do that, and anybody can do that with Urbit. And so we do expect it to see this sort of flowering of many different communities and societies on Urbit, and I think that's probably why, you know, somebody might think like, oh, are you gonna, you know, I don't know, go off and do something on your own with Herbet? Like, yeah, you can do that sort of thing. It's just not really governmental. It's more just like I don't know. It's more like you know, having a clubhouse or something, or having a
right. Yeah, sure.
Private spot for you and your friends, that kind of thing.
Sure. Right. Like, Urbit is obviously just a kind of normal software enterprise. It's a technical innovation. They're trying to build a technical system along pretty standard you know, software engineering lines. But it is kind of strange, isn't it, how, like, it seems that Urbit has something of a controversial reputation, or even just a connotation. Like, some people have some strange thoughts or feelings about Urbit. I think because, you know, the founder of Urbit, Curtis Yarvin, is also known for some of his political writings. But it's kind of interesting because what you're describing, although it has clear implications for sort of undercutting a lot of these centralized middlemen, these large corporations, it doesn't really have a particularly right-wing bias of any kind. It's a kind of a technical system that encourages and perhaps enables decentralized computing. But you could use it for left-wing purposes just as you could use it for right-wing purposes potentially, right? I mean, I don't see a very clear, I don't see any really political bias in it or anything like that.
I mean, it's not what we're trying to do, right? I mean, Herbet is explicitly politically neutral. It's explicitly for everyone. It's no, we're definitely not trying to build like, Gab or some kind of partisan social network, like not in the slightest. That's not what we're doing at all.
Right.
I mean, I think, I mean, Curtis has opinions, so some people associate his opinions with all of what we're trying to do, but most of those are actually just not relevant at all.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, what I'm kind of thinking is like there's a longstanding kind of left-wing tradition of trying to kind of engineer alternative communities that function along the lines of, let's say a kind of idealized dream of communism or something like that. And I'm kind of very interested in kind of emerging technologies, especially around Bitcoin or something like Urbit, because to me all of these technologies seem to just open the space for experimentation, for political experimentation in a left-wing direction and a right-wing direction, and also interesting combinations of the two. Like a lot of what I've been putting out recently, the stuff I've been writing and thinking about, is actually really trying to think about ways to engineer novel combinations of kind of ideological inputs and different types of personalities in kind of stable, attractive, collective equilibria. Like that's kind of what I'm thinking about more and more. And it seems to me that these emerging technologies actually just open the space for experimentation across the whole range. So, but it's odd how that gets coded today as like reactionary. Like it's very odd. You see this with Bitcoin, just like Urbit. I think Urbit and Bitcoin share a kind of similar problem in the public imagination, which is it gets kind of villainized sometimes by some like paranoid academic leftists, just because in a strange way it's like anything that escapes the clutches of kind of dominant mainstream like moral authorities is seen as reactionary or something like that. But that's very strange. It's not at all obvious.
Interesting. Yeah. No, yeah, you could. I mean, this is the thing: is you could build any kind of society that you want to on top of Herbet. You could build, you could build a full-on communist society. You could build liquid democracy. You could build other things. I mean, like it's a generic platform, and it's really not opinionated about how that sort of thing should go. I think. And yeah, it's almost more like a meta governance protocol.
Right.
Urbit is much more like that. It's much more like, okay, here's this substrate that's so flexible and universal that people can do whatever they want to do on top of it. The other thing is, if you wanted to build a total centralized service on top of Urbit, just the way you could recapitulate the existing internet if you wanted to, right? Just because it doesn't make you do it doesn't mean you can't. Right? So it's just sort of it should be sort of strictly more more flexible. Like you should be able to do anything that you can do with the existing internet and more. And yeah, I don't know, maybe that I guess I could see how that would be sort of and I guess to the extent that we have an opinion, it's that there should be many different sort of human societies, and they should all be able to flourish.
Right.
And yeah, I guess if we're against anything, it would be we're against anyone trying to say there should only be one human society that must all work exactly the same way.
Right. Yeah. I guess the fundamental premises of something like Urbit would be antagonistic towards that kind of universalistic imposition, because it does really kind of enables a wide variety of actors to basically do as they please.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering now if I've like overstated that, which I might have, but yeah, I do think that it's really this kind of like polycentric or centerless is a term that Galen, our CEO, uses sometimes. I think we think of like a well-functioning city sometimes. And actually, the word you asked about this briefly at the beginning is like, what does the word urbit means? And it comes from the Latin urbs, which means city, and that's where we get the word urban and things like that. So it's urbs plus bit for computer bit, right?
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's based on the idea of having a digital city, and Galen's really into the writings of Christopher Alexander, who's an architect. Have you ever read any Alexander?
No, tell me about it.
I think you might be into him. It's pretty. I've read a little, and it's what little I've read has been pretty interesting. And he had a lot of thoughts about sort of like the difference between top-down planned cities and cities that grew organically, in a more sort of bottom-up way. And his big critique was that when people plan cities, they plan it too hierarchically, and it ends up constricting the kind of normal vivacity of a city. And that if you look at the cities that have sort of grown organically, the different regions kind of blend into each other more, and there's less of a kind of like, this is the city center, and then everything else is sort of, sort of less dense than the city center. It's much more sort of multi-centric, where you have many different areas that are all sort of serving different functions or serving similar functions, right? And these things are more kind of blended and sort of natural seeming, and that's a much healthier and sort of more alive way of having a society. And I think that actually that matches very well with how we think about it with Urbit. This idea of like, it's good to let things bloom from a bottom up perspective and not try to kind of overly constrain these dynamics from the top down.
Right. I have a question for you. I mean, you may or may not want to even talk about any of this, but I mean, I don't think this is a touchy question, but like, I'm just trying to think about there is this kind of I guess image that some people on the internet have of Urbit as just because of Curtis/Moldbug's political perspectives. Some people do have this kind of image of Urbit as this like right-wing project, but like talking to you and kind of understanding better the basic technical idea of it, it doesn't strike me as very intrinsically right-wing. And so that leads me to wonder if I mean, are people who work at Herbet like generally right-wing or not even? I mean,
there's a big range.
Yeah, I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because and I think that actually, I think it's such a big range for people working there. I think because the project actually is that universal, right? And like, right. No, yeah, people are kind of all over the place.
Are there people who work at Urbit who are like kind of left-wing social justice activists?
I would say we have a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, we have at least one major anarcho-communist. And then a whole bunch of just like totally apolitical or very centrist people as well.
Right.
And a lot of yeah, and then a couple of just sort of like, I would say relatively standard San Francisco progressive people.
Right. Right. Do you find that the kind of lefty social justice culture in the Bay Area is? Do you have any takes on that? I mean, do you find it as kind of oppressive and widespread as some people say? Like, I know people are talking about how Peter Thiel has criticized the Bay Area and has kind of sought to escape for these sorts of reasons. Have you observed that type of problem, or you don't find it so onerous?
I don't know. It's not really my area of expertise.
Yeah, you're just an engineer. You don't want to wade into these
I'm not wading into that one.
political debates. Yeah, that's cool. Fair enough.
Well, and I don't, and I, yeah, I mean, I think, and Urbit as a whole, I think, doesn't wade into that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Cool. Well, I think this has definitely clarified my own understanding of Urbit. Is there anything we haven't gone over that you think? I mean, are there questions that you often get asked about Urbit that like kind of commonly recurring misunderstandings that are worth maybe clarifying now that I haven't asked you?
That's a good question. Actually, yeah, there's one, which is that it actually runs. It's not vaporware. This is a thing that exists. It's a piece of software you can run on your computer. It runs on OS 10 and OS 10 and Linux. And so if you're a geek, you can run it. I guess also that it's, we're not expecting this to become. I feel like a lot of the critiques of Herbet are, from a technical perspective, are very like short term. They're sort of like, oh, well, you can do. How is this any different from, just running a server on AWS, or how is this any different from like just Facebook or something like that? And there are short term answers to those questions, but I think the real answer is much more long term, which is that like we're working on a long term project to build a computing system that we expect to outperform the current computing system sometime in the next few decades, but not before then. And so, I think the real serious critiques of Herbet that I've seen, and there haven't been very many, unfortunately. It'd be great to see some better, sort of higher quality criticism. There have been a couple of good ones, but most of it's pretty shallow. The things to criticize really would be along the long-term architectural lines. So yeah, if you want to criticize Urbit, come criticize our long-term architecture, because that's the stuff that we're really kind of trying to build and trying to get right. And then I guess like I think because we do have some federated hierarchy in our routing structure, that people sometimes assume that it's a very sort of authoritarian project, or otherwise sort of too hierarchical. And I think that the funny thing about that is I actually, that hierarchy is so minimal, and it's just a skeleton. And if anything, I actually sometimes worry that it's kind of too much of a free for all. I would worry about the opposite. So I think people have the wrong idea about that. And then also and I think that often comes from the misconception that I mentioned earlier about people assuming that the social networks will be delineated along the same lines as the routing hierarchy, and it's just not the case. And so,
okay,
yeah, and we're completely committed to being politically neutral. Like it's really.
Mm-hmm.
And culturally neutral, for that matter. Right? We're really trying to build something that's for all of humanity, so that people can build their own cultures, build their own societies, and do that fluidly and peacefully.
Jacob Lyles wants to know, who's your favorite guitarist? I don't know why.
And it's kind of a basic answer, but it's probably Jimmy Page. The Tony Iommi is up there. No, I mean Hendrix might be the best guitarist.
But your favorite, Jimmy Page.
But my favorite is probably Jimmy Page.
Why is he asking that? Is that an inside joke?
Oh, because he and I,
or something.
Yeah. Well, I play guitar pretty seriously, and
oh, cool.
Yeah, I was in a band for a couple of years, and might start a new one soon. We'll see.
Oh, nice. Urbit the band. Cool.
No, we're not doing that.
Right. There was I think there was one other thing that just came to me. But which is, from what I was able to grok from reading the docs and stuff like that, is that the Urbit in the long run, Urbit won't have that much control or power over any of this, right? Like once it's up and running, if at the point at which Urbit gets if it were to be adopted widely and kind of replace the current infrastructure, there really wouldn't be much kind of discretion for Urbit as a kind of centralized agent, right?
I don't understand the question. Sorry, can you ask again?
Well, I saw some kind of questions or critiques about how Urbit as an agent, as a kind of a player in the larger network, may or may not have outsized kind of control or power over the development of things in the long run. But my understanding from what I was able to grok was,
do you mean like the company behind Herbet?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean,
okay. There is a distinction that needs to be made between the company behind Herbet, because there is a U.S. corporation, right, that employs me and the other people who are working full time on the code, and there is a difference between that and the network itself. So for now, the company has a controlling interest in the network. I think we own a little bit more than half of the addresses, something like that.
Right.
But in any case, it's enough that we have control over it for now. And that's deliberate because the network is very young and we want Urbit to be easy to run and manage, but it's not at the moment.
Right.
And so, but mostly just because it's kind of buggy. And the, so we don't really want to sort of force other people to like run their own Galaxies right now because it's too hard. And so and that'll be the case for a while. We want to kind of make sure that as we turn over control to the network as a whole, we do that in a smooth way that doesn't break stuff. And honestly, we don't really know what that's going to be like. It's kind of I don't know if it's something that's really been done before, but it's but long term, I think we plan on only holding something like 10 or 20% of the network. Like definitely not a majority interest, because we don't want the company in control of it. That's not the point.
Right.
If the company were in control of it, then it's not as valuable of a network, right? It's what will make Urbit the network valuable, both in a sort of monetary and spiritual sense, is the fact that it'll be run by the people in it, and not sort of controlled by any external entity.
Right. Okay.
That's really core to the idea. So, I think that's another sort of criticism that's kind of misplaced. I mean, it's also the kind of thing where like, I'm a little bit more worried about, what if we turn it over to people too early and they don't know how to do it yet? And that's part of why I want to kind of do something like this and a little bit more communication as to largely for like the people who are going to be involved with this, so they have a sense of what the ethos is and how they can go about kind of maintaining that.
Right. Okay. I have a question from the audience here. Is there a relationship between Urbit and Tim Berners-Lee's project of Solid? Are you familiar with this?
I'm passingly familiar with Solid. I think it's basically one of those things that's trying to build a small piece of Herbet. There are actually many of these. There are many projects that are sort of building something that's very similar to one of the layers of Herbet. And the general difference between Herbet and any of those projects is just that we're doing the whole thing, like the whole computing stack. Because of what I was explaining earlier, that if you just try to replace any one piece of that stack, it's not enough. And people have tried this over and over again and still haven't managed to make the dream of personal servers come true. I think there's some. I really don't know much about the technical details of Solid, but I think my impression is that like the data and the computation don't actually always live in the same place, and that seems like it's probably not very feasible. But we'll see. I don't know.
Okay.
There have also been other attempts to build identity systems using blockchain. So those are similar to our identity system, at least somewhat. But yeah, so there's an old joke, which is called Greenspun's 10th Rule. It's an old programming joke created by Philip Greenspun, which is that every sufficiently complicated program written in Fortran or C includes an ad hoc, poorly specified, slow and buggy version of half of Common Lisp.
Okay.
Common Lisp is one of those kind of monumental languages in computer science.
Okay.
And somebody, I don't know who it was, but somebody came up with one of these for Urbit, which is that every sufficiently complex decentralized system includes an ad hoc, informally specified, slow, and buggy version of half of Herbet.
Okay.
And I have found this to be the case. You'll see, which actually I think is really a very good sign about the technical design of Herbet, that you see individual pieces of the design sort of popping up in lots of other systems. And what differentiates us really is that those are integrated into a very coherent design where everything from the low-level sort of functional machine code all the way up through the identity system have a very consistent feel and a very consistent design, and they're all designed to work together. So because of that, you get these sort of resonances in the design that kind of echo at all these different layers. And that's part of how we're able to make the whole thing sort of so small and so understandable. I mean, there's a critique that Urbit's hard to understand, but I think it's really, that has to be compared against how long did it take somebody to understand all of the current computing system.
Right. That makes sense to me. Like, that makes sense to me why Urbit has this kind of unique shroud of mystery around it, because it sounds like it's because you're trying to rebuild something from the fundamentals. So of course that takes a little bit longer. It's a little bit more abstract. It's not going to, be useful for a longer period of time. Those are just kind of obvious implications of trying to redo anything from scratch. So it sounds like that's what's going on.
Yeah. And I think there also have been a couple of mistakes along the way that have made that worse than it would have had to be. So, the names of some of the things internally are just, there are a lot of just these kind of random 4-letter names, and we're moving away from that. But yeah, I think that made it a little bit harder to understand than it would have needed to be.
Right. Well, I think the whole planet and star galaxy system is pretty cool. I think that's very evocative. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too.
Cool. Well, we've been talking for quite some time. I don't want to overtax you. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. Was there anything else you wanted to get off your chest, or that you think it's important for me to know, or for my audience to know, or anything?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
How long have you been with Herbet?
Almost a year and a half.
Okay. Nice. And you just moved to the Bay Area?
No, I've been in San Francisco for almost 8 years now.
Okay, but you moved to where you are right now, I guess?
Yeah, I moved from, I had a studio apartment, and I moved from that to this, to where I am right now, actually, in the roof deck of, it's a community sort of co-op type thing.
Oh, okay.
City.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of looking to maybe like build my own society or government or something somewhere. So it sounds like I'll probably have to use Urbit if I'm going to do that. It won't be like a reactionary neo-cameral kind of soft court, but it'll probably be more like a kind of aristocratic communist collectively owned soft corp sort of thing. So it sounds like
that makes a ton of sense. I think that's obvious to everyone what you mean.
yeah,
about that.
it's basically all worked out. I just
Very clear.
haven't really told you all the details. Don't worry about it. No. But it sounds like I need to learn Urbit though. So I think I need to starting tomorrow. I'm gonna begin intensive training in Urbit.
Well, I'm down to help you learn help you learn it.
Awesome.
I don't know if I condone your governance, but hey, you know, we take all kinds. So,
well, I might. I mean, I'm sure you have much better things to do with your Urbit skills. But I mean, maybe that's actually a nice way to end it briefly. Like what, for someone like me who's just like a whatever kind of dilettante neophyte programmer or whatever. Like what would be like a fun kind of starter project if someone wanted to start kind of playing around with Herbet?
Maybe like a personal reminder kind of thing, or something or actually there's a chatbot program that you can start from. That's kind of fun. Yeah, so you can just have a program that listens on chat and filters messages and maybe sends responses in certain cases. So you can have fun with that pretty easily without getting too deep into the code.
Wait, so I'm going to betray my ignorance at the end of this long, intelligent conversation. I'm going to betray my my persistent stupidity by the following question. But just to clarify, that's not when you talk about a chatbot on Urbit. That you're not talking about. It's not running in a kind of like private Urbit testing sandbox, right? Like it would go on the proper internet as I would think of it, right?
So actually, so you could write a chatbot in Urbit that is for some other chat system potentially. We have connectors to a few systems. Like we have connectors for Facebook and Gmail and Twitter. So you could write a
chatbot on Urbit that's hosted on your Urbit personal server that runs on Facebook.
Yeah, you could do that.
Okay.
It's not that user friendly, so I wouldn't recommend doing that at the moment. Although that's something we're going to be working on over the next year or two is really getting those connectors between Urbit and other systems to work a lot better. But then, and that's basically to facilitate transition into Herbet. We don't want that to have to be like a sharp disconnect where you have a big feeling of loss when you move out of your Facebook group or whatever, right? We want you to be able to sort of migrate all that stuff over.
Oh, dude, I want like a strong feeling of loss when I get off Facebook. That sounds great. So you were saying as a toy project, you were saying there's a chatbot program.
Yeah, and that's for Urbit chat. So, if you get on Urbit chat, which you can do very easily just by running an Urbit, or relatively easily, you do have to have a little bit of sort of command line experience to run the program. But yeah, you can have a chatbot on Urbit chat, and yeah, you can create your own chat channels if you just want to talk with, if you don't want to be on one of the public channels, you want to do something privately.
Dude, what about like a few days ago, my Discord server that I run got shut down. Is there
Really?
like can I use Urbit to like solve this problem, and like can I make a chat server that's like not going to get shut down?
Yeah, if you run an Urbit server, nothing can shut you down.
But in a way, is there a way to do it that like normal people can get on it easily, or no, not yet?
Not really. No, you do have to be able to set it up, and we envision this being like a sort of one-click web download at some point, but it's not that yet. And so yeah, if your friends are willing to go into the terminal and run a couple lines, then yeah, they could do it. It's also, keep in mind that it's not secure yet. But yeah, I mean, you can run a chat through Urbit, and you can have it be completely like unlisted and private and encrypted. And yeah, and once you do that with Urbit, there's nobody who can shut you down. That's kind of the point.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
No,
Like this is actually, it's interesting this happened to you. This is basically, you're asking what's the use case for Urbit. It's that, right? You want to talk with your friends on some Discord server. They shut you down.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it sucks because I mean I'm not even that like I'm not even that controversial. I don't say stuff that's that bad at all. And my people who hang out with like me or whatever online, they're quite well behaved people. So it was quite strange. I have a theory that I think someone just like I think one of my enemies kind of targeted me with like a bunch of complaints or something like that. But yeah, that's one kind of immediate use case that I'm starting to already think about. Because if I want to do this kind of stuff more and kind of like maintain a community of other people who, you know, I'm kind of like responsible for this like community in some sense, I have to like find robust infrastructure for holding it up in a way that's not just like going to get constantly shut down. And so like, yeah, I'm quite like on the market, if you will, for figuring out how to do that in a robust way. And I would be quite willing to invest a lot of effort into learning, you know, stuff I don't already know. But I think the key thing at this point is it would have to be like usable by normal people.
Yeah.
So
well, we're working on it, but it'll be a year or two, I think, before it's something that you know, a non-nerd would be willing to put up with.
Well, at least one person in the audience has strongly enjoyed this with a nice super chat for $50 actually from Brenton Milne. So all
right,
I guess our conversation is quite valuable to some people out there. That's really cool. Thanks, Brenton. Appreciate that.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Cool, man. I don't want to keep you much longer. This has been, you know, very stimulating for me and useful. And
yeah, me too. You have some good questions.
Oh, good.
These are the kind of, I feel like these are yeah, like the kind of questions that people sort of should be asking about Herbet, really. Like you know, what's it good for? How does it work? How is it better than the existing internet? Yeah.
Right. So. Right. Oh, got another super chat from Heinrich who says, thanks for an interesting interview. So yeah, looks like Ted, people are quite enthusiastic about this talk we just had. So that's really cool.
Well, that's great.
I might have to invite you back on when my aristocratic communist patchwork softcorp takes off at a later.
Okay, I'll read your white paper.
At a later, yeah, when the white paper's out, I'll send it to you. I might maybe at some point invite you back.
I assume this thing that you're building is
what's that? You broke out.
Blockchain. I assume the society you're building is blockchain based.
Right? Oh, definitely, dude. I gotta like. Next up, I'm gonna tokenize whatever that means. I'm not quite sure, but
you definitely got to tokenize.
Yeah. So probably at a later stage, I might enlist your consulting services if you're available at that time.
Okay. All right.
Thanks a lot, Ted. This is fun, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, me too.
All right, I'll be in touch with you, man. Later on. All right. That was awesome. Really interesting. I feel like I genuinely understand Urbit much better now. So that's cool. What else we got in the chat here? Just in society, we'll have 2 blockchains. Wow. I'm not greedy. Don't worry. That was cool. Yeah, I think it's got to be interesting, but also difficult working for Urbit in the current kind of political environment. I was trying not to ask Ted, you know, questions that were too dicey or whatever. Like I'm personally quite interested in, you know, what is the underlying relationship between the political writings of Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Moldbug, and Urbit. But I think for this conversation, I wanted to kind of keep it mostly to the technical details and just try to pin down a little bit better what's going on under the hood of Urbit, because I think a lot of people don't understand it. I certainly don't fully understand it, but that really helped, I think. And I think that will give me more of a basis for thinking about the larger political implications. I mean, one thing that was very clear to me, and again, I didn't want to ask Ted too much about this because, you know, political issues are very difficult, especially when you work for a company. You know, you have to understandably be very careful about how you represent things. So I didn't want to put Ted in the hot seat, but I was kind of thinking a lot about the overlapping themes between Urbit as a technical infrastructure and the writings of Moldbug, because there's clearly a lot. I think it's very easy to see, for instance, how the idea of patchwork, for instance, Moldbug's kind of vision for a large space of different competing governments that are essentially private corporations, sovereign corporations that basically provide government as a private commercial service and do so in this very kind of large, decentralized, potentially kind of global patchwork system, and basically do so on a competitive basis. You could very clearly see that Urbit instantiates something like that in a digital format. I think Ted's right that there's clearly no particularly edgy political project behind or within Urbit as a company, but you can definitely see some strong parallels between the basic technical idea of Urbit and Moldbug's larger politics, which is definitely quite interesting, I think. So that's something I'd like to think more about, perhaps. Let's see what people are saying in the chat. There's a lot of stuff coming up that I'm missing now. Mr. EV wants to know about my classes, or whatever you want to call them. Yeah, we've just started doing private seminars, basically, for patrons, and that's been really fun. This was the first week that we did it. There'll be one each month, or as many as I need to do each month, for small groups of about 5 or 6, probably, at least at first. And yeah, so if you have questions about that, just shoot me a DM on Twitter or shoot me an email. You should be able to find that on my website without too much problem, or by Googling it. I'm happy to talk about that. Probably easier to do it that way than for me to go on long rants about it on here. I don't want to bore people. Someone says my society is going to have one more blockchain than JDogs. Yeah, so what? I'll just get another blockchain then. People apparently in the chat know of Ted. Apparently we got a few Urbit users in the Hangouts here. People knew who he was, so that's cool. Let's see what else we have. Dude, that would be sweet if we could figure out how to do live streaming over Urbit. I'm sure there's a way. I probably don't have the hacker skills, but who knows? Maybe sometime soon I will become a expert Urbit hacker. We'll see. Honestly, like, I'm kind of at a point where I am. I do a little bit of programming. I'm not very good at anything, but especially if my, let's say, career trajectory changes dramatically sometime in the near future, as it possibly might, I could very well invest hardcore into really learning way more about, particular programming languages, and especially if it had a payoff in terms of like these other things I'm doing about trying to kind of cultivate a larger and more sustainable kind of personal platform and community for, radical intellectual free speech and creativity or whatever. I would be willing to put in a lot of work to figuring out how to do that, how to program that or whatever. The main bottleneck, I think, for me and what my potential use cases are the public accessibility. But who knows? Once it's like any type of new technology. Once the accessibility reaches a certain kind of critical threshold, and it's just barely available enough for other people to get on it in a less technical way, then yeah, I would be quite keen to possibly investing more in developing the programming skills necessary to set up this cool kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it feels like it's just not quite there yet, but we'll see. Yeah, I know you all love my sweater. Yeah, it's cold in here. We're kind of cheap. We don't run the heat too much. So I just bundle up a bit. I always have, ever since I lived in like the squat building I lived in Philly. Someone says, read Curtis Yarvin's essay on software from Mars. I've never read it. I think a few people mentioned that in the chat, but I didn't know what they were referring to about Mars. So that's cool. I would read that. What else do we got? Yeah, I don't know how many times I need to tell you folks I'm not a Fed. It would be much easier if I was a Fed. Justin, would you do a seminar on programming in R? Yeah, that's like the one programming language I pretty good at. Honestly, though, to be perfectly frank, I mean, I'm not. If you're like an expert R programmer, you would probably find my R code a joke. You know, as an academic, I've learned kind of statistical data programming well enough to be able to do like, you know, I can do pretty sophisticated statistical modeling in R and data analysis and graphics and stuff. But as a coder, you know, and from a programming perspective, my code is probably terribly slow, inefficient, probably looks ugly, you know. So I hardly feel like I'm in a very good position to teach programming in R, even though I'm, you know, I know my way around it and can do a lot of stuff with it. For applied purposes, you know, for like, you know, beginners who want to analyze social and political data, I could definitely teach a lot of stuff related to R. I could definitely give someone a strong education in R. I've given like paid workshops on time series modeling, for instance. Most of that was done in Stata, though. Actually, I could just as well do it in R. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I could do that sort of stuff. My YouTube channel actually, funny story. My YouTube channel actually started. I threw on some videos, just some like tutorials of how to do stuff in R. Initially for students, like undergraduate students, when I was teaching stats classes. And I actually have a few videos that got a lot of, like one of my R instructional videos has like 100,000 views or something like that. It's like by far the most viewed video on my whole YouTube. It's like some really simple random R programming tutorial. So yeah, I could definitely do more of that. I have definitely been thinking about doing more of that, you know, especially if my career trajectory changes very dramatically in the next few months or whatever. You know, one of many possible things I could do much more of is, yeah, build up that whole kind of like learn how to do political data analysis in R kind of little subspace in my internet properties, because apparently like my YouTube is already doing fairly well in that space on that part of the algorithm for YouTube or whatever. So that's something I could possibly do more of. I mean, if people are actually interested in that, I don't know. I can't imagine many of you listening to these would be interested in that, but it would definitely be useful to know if you are. So definitely let me know. But other than this one person whose name is unpronounceable because it's just a bunch of strings of letters, I'm not sure there's too many people very interested in that. Live streaming is doable in principle, says Marco. You just have to implement the video and audio code and plug two Urbits together. Oh, sounds easy. I'll do that tomorrow. Let's see what else. All right, folks. I think we will call it a night then. So thanks for hanging out as always. Big thanks to all my patrons. It's my squad, my crew. Much appreciated. I am going to be uploading actually so on Patreon, I have this like little thing called my hard drive. And for patrons, I kind of let people see like stuff that has been sitting on my hard drive. So I have a lot of like work that's already done, like essays and articles and all kinds of stuff that's basically not really finished and polished, or I don't really know what to do. Maybe it is basically finished, but I don't know where to put it, or I don't know where to submit it or post it or whatever. I just have like all the stuff on my hard drive. So one of my ideas for the Patreon is basically like just throw online a bunch of stuff that's pretty valuable. I think that's good stuff. I haven't done anything with it yet. Might as well just share it with people. So that's one thing that I give as a kind of token of appreciation for patrons. So on my Patreon, there's something I call my hard drive. And to get it started, when I first put it up last month, I just threw up a couple things. Now I'm getting ready to post. I'll try to post like at least one or two like valuable things a month until my hard drive is empty, and all the good stuff sitting on my hard drive is actually on my Patreon. And this month I'm going to be uploading, like in the next couple of days, I'm going to put on there I have this like 6,000 word essay on the kind of the history of information technology, specifically in kind of the early modern period. So I'm really interested in around, the years from like 1200 to 1600. I'm really interested in the history of information technology innovations in that time period. And I think it was about a year ago that I wrote this like long, it's basically like a journal article length piece, kind of talking about the key series of innovations specifically related to the kind of the measurement, the quantitative measurement of reality. I read this really good book about a year ago on the history of quantification, basically. And the reason I'm really interested in that period is because this is kind of like the runway to the acceleration of modernity. Like if modernity is this kind of, if modernity is the inflection point where kind of the exponential takeoff inflects, like, this is basically what Nick Land thinks. And this is what I think a lot of people thinks. This is what a lot of people think. If that is the case, then I was, for a while, I was quite interested in like what was going on in the couple hundred years before that inflection point. And yeah, and it's quite interesting to kind of look at that period as a kind of runway for the takeoff of modernity. And yeah, so I have this like 6,000 word essay or article that kind of goes through that history and tries to understand like what that looks like and what's happening. So that is what I've been getting ready, actually, just today and the day before. I'm getting that ready to post that. As I said, it's like I'm going to be posting to that like unpolished things, like stuff that's just sitting on my hard drive. That's good enough to share for sure. That's valuable, I think. But just don't know how to really frame it to put it somewhere else, or I don't know exactly where to put it. So it'll be fair. These things are like somewhat raw things that I am, they come with the caveat that I'm not exactly sure what the value or upshot is. So some of it's kind of obscure. But yeah, that's a good one. I think one of the many valuable things on my hard drive that is just collecting dust. So yeah. All right. So I got to go do that. Actually, I'm going to try to get that done before I go to sleep tonight. It's only 9:34 here. I'm used to doing these streams late at night, so thought it was later. What we got going on here? Yeah. So I'm going to actually try to get that done tonight. And yeah. What about you folks? Any news, information, questions I should know before we split? That was cool. I want to get more technical people on here. I think it's nice speaking with people who actually know something complicated and difficult in precise detail, because then I'm always sure I'm gonna learn something that I don't already know. I think other live streams I do, it's just kind of for fun, or there are different types of conversations. I think there are different reasons to have conversations, and those reasons can be equally worthwhile. But it's nice talking with technical experts sometimes, because you're kind of guaranteed to get a specifically kind of empirically improved understanding of something technical. So you're welcome, Father Grigori. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Good to hear. I'm not on Gab, actually. I have to admit, I'm kind of curious about Gab, just because with my experience being shut down on the Discord server. Oh, by the way, if you want to join the Discord server, I try to always say this. If you're out there and you want to join the Discord server and you're not in there already, just shoot me a DM on Twitter or send me an email and I'll hook it up. I've been curious about Gab just because, I know they have a bad reputation to a lot of people anyway, as just like this kind of like far right wing place where people go to, I don't know, celebrate MAGA or whatever. But I don't know if it's, I'm just curious. I don't know what it's really like. Gab doxes its users, someone says. EV wants my clothing items. That's a little strange, but okay. Gab has censored stuff. Okay, so Gab is not as like radical free speech absolutist as you might think, I guess. Yeah, I've been thinking about signing up just to check it out, just to go on there and have a look around, see what it's like. Marco says it's like their intent is to be this First Amendment place, but it seems like they suffer from the witches not hunted here effect. Interesting. Right. I could imagine they attract or select for strange figures. But I'm not judging it. I'm not prejudging it. I like I said, I'm kind of curious on. I'm curious about getting on there actually and just having a look around and seeing what it's like. I think my Discord server is pretty dope. I think like the community that's emerging there has been pretty good and seems to be getting better. So yeah, I'm quite content, I think, with that for now as a place to chat with people. But yeah, Twitter. I mean, it does seem like Twitter is going down the drain. I think like probably it'll get worse and worse until there'll be some sort of critical moment where there's mass defection to something else. I'm not sure that's going to be Gab though. It's a good question what it will be. Yes, Marco, come on by the Discord, say what's up. But there's a new one, so just keep that in mind. Let me know if you need invite. Someone says the only thing they had going for them was the free speech absolutism, but they don't even subscribe to that in practice anymore. So it's definitely an echo chamber. Yeah, Urbit seems cool, man. I feel like I'm now like kind of a Urbit booster. It sounds like I would like. It sounds pretty good. Like it sounds like I would like for it to succeed, and I would like for it to succeed sooner than later. It sounds pretty attractive to, like what Ted was describing. I kind of wish I could get up on that sooner in a easier way. Yeah, if I could be convinced of like some kind of rewarding some reward from doing it, I would definitely buckle down and see if I could learn my way around Urbit. I just want to be able to do actually cool stuff concretely with people. So yeah, I don't want to just like do it as a hobby. All right, folks. This is where we part ways for the evening. Thank you for hanging out. As always, it's been fun. And as I said, I think the last time, I'm currently spending a lot of time sending out emails right now. So I'm quite confident that we will have some killer guests, even more over the next few weeks and months, because I'm putting out a lot of emails. So even if some of them are too good for me, or think they're too cool for me, or think I'm too problematic, or whatever the case might be, we'll get some good people for sure, no doubt. We're going to have Reza Negarestani sometime in the next few weeks. That'll be exciting. And yeah, I'm pretty sure we got some other cool people coming up. I'll keep you posted. But yeah, thanks everyone. Take it easy. I wish you all the best.